My name's Amber, 26 years old, and I have just officially received my master's degree in business administration from the University of Michigan, a milestone I sacrificed nearly my entire youth to achieve. Tonight, I chose the Chop House in Ann Arbor, a fine dining restaurant, and reserved a table for four: my father, my mother, my younger sister Emily, and myself. I wanted to make this evening a special moment, a once-in-a-lifetime memory where my whole family would sit together and finally acknowledge my efforts. Looking at the carefully set table, the pristine white tablecloth, the warm golden candlelight reflecting through a glass of red wine, I saw 3 empty chairs waiting. Inside me was a strange mixture of hope and fear. I knew my family had never truly valued me. Since childhood, all attention and affection had always gone to Emily. When I won academic awards, they ignored it. When I survived a difficult surgery, they were absent. But with Emily, even a small performance or a simple change of major was celebrated as a grand achievement. I admit, at times, I grew used to the silence, used to carrying everything on my own, used to consoling myself. But tonight, I still believed things would be different. I wanted to believe they would walk through that door, look at me with pride in their eyes, and finally say the words I had longed to hear all these years. "Amber, we are proud of you." An hour passed in tense waiting, the candle on the table flickering low, and the chairs across from me remained empty. The waiter walked by several times, his eyes filled with a trace of pity, as if silently asking whether my guests would ever arrive. I forced a smile and said they must be stuck in traffic, but deep down, unease began to rise in a way I could hardly describe. My phone buzzed softly. I grabbed it quickly, my heart racing with one last glimmer of hope. But what awaited me was nothing more than a short message from my mother. "You're not exactly a priority right now. We'll catch up soon." I read it over and over, each word cutting into my chest like a cold blade. Not a priority right now. That was how my mother described the day of my master's graduation, the day I had dreamed would finally bring our family together. I bit my lip until it bled, my hands trembling as I slowly placed the phone back on the table. I told myself to be patient, that maybe it was just a misunderstanding, that they would still show up. But when the clock struck close to 10 at night, 2 hours after that text, I no longer needed to comfort myself with false hope. A Facebook notification flashed across my screen like a slap to the face. Emily, my sister, had just posted a series of glowing photos from Plymouth Lakefront Restaurant, a lakeside venue not far from where I was. In the pictures, my entire family sat beaming around a dinner table, glasses of wine raised high, smiles filling every face. The caption, written with pride, read, "Family night out for the real success story." Beneath it were comments congratulating Emily on signing her new PR photography contract. I sat frozen, staring at the screen. Not a single word mentioned me, not one hint that today was also the day I completed a long, grueling academic journey. The day I officially stepped out of years of study and into my career. In those photos, my chair didn't exist, as if I had never been part of that family at all. I drew in a deep breath, trying to hold myself together, but my shoulders trembled, and at last the tears slipped free, rolling down onto the pristine white tablecloth. I lowered my face, fists clenched tight, but I no longer had the strength to wipe away the smudged mascara staining my cheeks. Have you ever felt the sting of being dismissed and abandoned by your own family at the very moment you needed them most? If my story touches you in any way, let me know where you're listening from, so I'll know I'm not alone. Sitting in a daze in that elegant dining room, I heard the soft footsteps approaching. The young waiter gave me a strained smile as he set down a polished brown leather folder, inside of which was the bill I knew I couldn't avoid. I opened it, and the bold number at the very bottom made my heart stop for a moment. $1,840. That was the cost of a 4-person dinner with the special menu I had carefully chosen so my family could have a night to remember. But in reality, it was only me left sitting there, sipping water in humiliation, while the other 3 chairs remained forever empty. I took a deep breath, slid my credit card out of my wallet, swiped it mechanically, and signed my name with trembling hands. I still left a generous tip, because I saw the sympathetic look in the waiter's eyes. None of this was his fault, and I didn't want anyone else to suffer just because my family had chosen to abandon me. But inside, I felt as though I was plummeting into an abyss, humiliated and suffocated by the weight of pain. When I stepped out of the restaurant, the night air in Ann Arbor cut sharp and cold. I pulled my coat tightly around me and walked heavily toward the parking lot. The dim yellow streetlights stretched my shadow, a lonely reminder that no matter how much I had grown, no matter the degree I had earned or the independence I had built, in my family's eyes, I was still someone who didn't deserve to be a priority. What stung most was knowing that for years, I had been the very one keeping their priorities intact through my own sweat, tears, and money. Memories crashed over me like relentless waves. At 22, fresh out of college and starting my first job at a small financial firm, I should have been enjoying the fruits of years of hard work. But before long, my father was hospitalized with diabetes complications. The medical bills came to nearly $8,000, and insurance didn't cover it all. I emptied my very first savings, even borrowed in desperation from colleagues, just so my mother wouldn't have to pawn the wedding ring she loved to flaunt to the neighbors. Not a single word of gratitude followed. All I heard was, as the eldest daughter, sacrifice is your duty. It didn't stop there. A year later, Emily, my spoiled younger sister, decided to drop out of college for the second time. Once again, the family turned to me, pressuring me to pay for her restart, with the excuse that Emily is still young, she needs opportunities, while you're already stable. I shouldered over $15,000 in tuition debt, paying it off in monthly installments, all while I was still struggling to finish paying off my own student loans. Emily attended a few semesters and then quit again, and I kept hearing the same refrain. You have to care for your sister, she's more fragile than you. My mother often turned me into her backup bank as well. Whenever her credit card payments were overdue, she would call me with a voice that was half pleading, half reproachful. You're earning so much, and I have no one else. If you don't help, I'll lose face with my friends. I ended up covering bill after bill, from small debts of a few $100s to nearly $3,000 at a time for reckless shopping sprees. I still remember one month when I refused because my paycheck was too tight. She went silent for days, only to return later with the words, "I'm disappointed in you. You're no different from a stranger." Those words broke me, and I cried all night, before finally pulling money from my savings to cover her balance. Driving home that night, I let those memories wrap tight around my mind. For 4 years, ever since I turned 22, I had not lived for myself. Every paycheck, every bonus, even the smallest dreams like traveling or buying a new car, had been swallowed whole by the bottomless pit called family. I couldn't even remember the last time I treated myself to an expensive meal or a new dress. Meanwhile, Emily could get the latest phone every year, drop out of school to pursue her passion for photography without a care in the world, because her big sister was always there to cover her. Tonight, as I paid nearly $2,000 for a dinner that never even happened, I suddenly realized I was repeating the same old pattern, paying the price for things my family never valued. But this time, the humiliation was laid bare before my eyes. I had sat there, covering the cost of a meal where the very people I called family had abandoned me to celebrate another so-called success without me. And for the first time in my life, I saw clearly that this injustice was not just a series of isolated moments, it was an entire system I had been shackled to for years. I pulled my car over to the side of the road, sitting still in the dark cabin as fresh tears spilled out again. I thought about the long nights waiting tables and scrubbing dishes during college just to pay tuition because my parents said they couldn't afford it. I thought about how I never once had a proper birthday party, while Emily had a lavish 18th with a live band and dozens of guests. I thought about the time I dreamed of owning a small apartment of my own, but instead of saving, I signed monthly mortgage checks for the house in Canton, a house I didn't live in because my mother insisted, this is for the family's future. I may. And tonight, with the $1,840 receipt still in my wallet, I saw more clearly than ever before. I never truly had a shared future with them. All I had was a present that was exhausting, a present full of burdens, and a present where I was constantly forgotten. And in that exact moment, a new thought began to form inside me, sharp, undeniable, and resolute. It was time to stop living as an ATM for my family. I returned to my small apartment drained, humiliated, and hollow. When I switched on the light, the familiar room glowed, a space defined by 4 bare walls and a few pieces of minimalist furniture I had saved for months to afford. I set my bag down, collapsed into the chair, and opened my laptop out of habit. The screen lit up, dragging back memories I had tried to bury. I logged into the joint bank account I shared with my mother, the one where, for the past 4 years, I had set up an automatic transfer of $2,100 each month to cover the mortgage on the house in Canton, Michigan. The house that had never once been considered mine. Since college, I had never lived there, never had a room of my own. Every time I visited, I had to sleep on the living room couch because my old bedroom had long been transformed into Emily's personal photography studio. The number glowing on the bank screen made me freeze, over $100,000 gone in the last 4 years. Every single dollar, every cent, was my sweat and tears, overtime pay, year-end bonuses, even the savings I once dreamed of using for a trip to Europe or for a small condo in my own name. All of it had been swallowed by that house. Yet in my mother's eyes, this was nothing more than my natural duty. I still remember the first time I timidly asked, "Mom, I've been paying the mortgage all this time. Will I ever be considered a co-owner of the house?" She looked at me with a thin, dismissive smile and answered curtly, "A capable daughter should know how to sacrifice. The house belongs to your parents. Don't think about what's fair or not." Her words sounded gentle, but they hit like a bucket of ice water in my face, extinguishing every hope I had for fairness. From that day on, I barely dared to bring up the subject of repayment or ownership again. Each time the thought rose to my lips, I remembered the coldness in her eyes, a look that carried both contempt and reproach. Once, when I tried to say that paying the mortgage was weighing me down too heavily, she merely sighed, called Emily over, pointed at me, and said, "See, your sister is always calculating. But you, just live freely. Don't worry about money. She'll take care of it." I fell silent, swallowing my bitterness, because I knew that if I argued, I would only become more of a selfish villain in their eyes. But tonight, as I scrolled through the entire transaction history, I could no longer control the trembling in my chest. For over 4 years, who had I really been living for? I had thrown myself into work, taken weekend shifts, accepted projects no one else wanted just to earn extra money, not to build a life for myself, but to keep alive a so-called family home that was nothing more than a cage with me locked outside. I remembered the time I fell seriously ill, feverish to the point I could barely stand, and thought I might finally receive some care. Instead, my mother simply called to remind me, "Don't forget this month's transfer, the bank won't wait for you." I leaned back in my chair, my hand pressed against my temple. Images stacked on top of one another. Emily proudly showing off her newly renovated room for photo shoots, my mother boasting to neighbors that we support our youngest, while our eldest can handle everything on her own, and my father staying silent, never once stepping in to defend me. Whenever someone asked why I hadn't bought my own place yet, why I hadn't started a family, my mother's answer was always, "Amber has to put family first. She's so responsible." It sounded admirable, but the truth was, I had been nothing more than a cash machine shielding them from the weight of their own poor choices. A heavy, drawn-out sigh escaped me. I reached out and touched the laptop screen, staring at the numbers draining away like blood being siphoned from my veins. For the first time, I dared to ask myself directly, who have I been living for all these years? Not for me, not for my happiness, but only to sustain an illusion of a complete family in which one person was endlessly exploited while the other 3 lived carefree. Anger and humiliation surged together, like a fire that had been trapped for too long and finally found a crack to escape. I realized that I had never truly lived. I had only existed as a shadow, as a shield absorbing every blow for them, only to be abandoned every time I needed a hand to hold. That night at the chop house was not just abandonment, it was the final drop that overflowed the glass, the clearest proof that I had never once been their priority, even though I had paid with my entire youth. I sat there, the glow of the screen reflecting off my tear-reddened eyes. A string of memories echoed in my head, the endless calls saying, "Amber, can you cover this for me?" Emily's careless remarks, "You've got money, don't you?" And all the times I fooled myself into believing that was love, that my sacrifices would eventually be recognized. But the truth was different. The truth was, I had been exploited over and over again. And tonight, I could no longer pretend otherwise. I took a deep breath, my hand trembling on the mouse, then slowly moved it toward the button that read, "Cancel recurring payment." The cursor blinked like a faint light in the darkness, and I knew that with just one click, the endless cycle of torment would finally end. My heart pounded so hard I could hear it echoing in my chest, but there was nothing left to hesitate over. I clicked. A notification appeared. "Your automatic payment has been canceled." Just a single line of text, yet it felt as if I had severed the chain that had kept me imprisoned for years. I closed the laptop, my palms still damp with sweat. But in that moment, for the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe freely. I stood up, pulled a small yellow sticky note from the drawer, and scribbled the words I had buried in my mind for so long. "Let Emily pay it now." The strokes were firm, decisive, a declaration that I would never return to my old role again. I stared at the note for a long while, then folded it and slipped it into the pocket of my coat. The night was deep, and the city of Ann Arbor lay quiet. I grabbed my car keys and walked down to the parking lot. The sound of the engine starting up echoed in the stillness like an affirmation. I drove away from my apartment, heading toward Canton, where that house stood, the house that had drained the life out of me for 4 years. The midnight highway stretched empty, lit only by endless rows of yellow streetlights. I drove in silence, hearing nothing but the whistle of wind through the cracked window and the steady rhythm of my heartbeat returning to calm. When I turned into the familiar neighborhood, the scene unfolded like an old film. Well-kept houses, neatly trimmed lawns, faint golden light spilling from bedroom windows. I stopped the car in front of my family's house. It was completely dark, silent. I sat in the car for a few minutes, staring at the walls that had consumed hundreds of thousands of my dollars, thinking about all the nights I had worked myself to exhaustion just to keep this place out of the bank's hands. The irony cut deep. Even inside that house, I had never had a place of my own. I opened the car door and stepped out. The night wind was sharp, carrying the chill of damp grass and the rustle of leaves overhead. I pulled the note from my coat pocket, gripping it so tightly the edges crumpled in my hand. Each step toward the front door felt heavy, yet unshakably firm. The sound of my heels striking the concrete echoed in the stillness, blending with the wind like the score to my own release. Standing before the dark wooden door, the same door I had opened countless times hoping to find warmth, but finding only disappointment, I now saw it as nothing more than a symbol of chains. I drew in a breath, peeled the backing from the strip of tape I had brought, and pressed the note firmly onto the center of the door. The words stared back at me. "Let Emily pay it now." I stepped back, staring for a long moment, searing it into memory. It wasn't just a piece of paper, it was a declaration, a verdict, the final cord being severed. I turned away and walked back. The wind whipped my hair, and the tassels of my graduation gown fluttered behind me like a strange emblem reminding me of the pain of that empty evening, yet signaling the start of a new chapter. The streetlights cast my shadow long across the pavement, a shadow standing tall, no longer bent under the weight of duty. Each footstep landed stronger than the last, as though I was leaving behind not only a house but an entire life of submission. When the car door closed behind me, I sat still for a moment, breathing deeply, then started the engine. This time, the sound was no longer heavy, it resounded like the drumbeat of freedom. I drove off without looking back, leaving that house to drown in its own darkness, along with the small note that would shatter my family at sunrise. On the road home, I caught sight of the streetlights receding in the rearview mirror. A strange lightness filled my chest, as though shackles that had bound me for years had finally fallen away. I realized that the moment I pressed that note onto the door was the moment I had truly chosen to live for myself. No more mortgages, no more false responsibilities, no more role as the financial lifeline for those who never once thought of me. The next morning, the first light of day slipped through the thin curtains, casting a pale glow across my small apartment. I hadn't slept much after the long night of driving and making the biggest decision of my life. My body was exhausted, but inside, there was a strange sense of relief, as if I had finally shrugged off a massive weight that had been crushing me for years. I reached for my phone to check the time, and instantly the screen lit up with a number that froze me in place. 79 missed calls. I stared at the list: Mom, Dad, and Emily. Names that had once been tied to my childhood and my sense of responsibility, but now felt only like burdens. I opened the voicemail inbox, my fingers trembling slightly. The first message played, and it was my mother's voice. I had never heard her sob like that before, but instead of sympathy, all I felt was a tightening in my chest. Amber, you're so selfish. Do you even know what you've done? Do you want this whole family to lose our house? Do you want me to die before you're satisfied? How could you be so cruel to your own family? Her voice cracked, filled with both accusation and hysteria. Each word cut sharp like a blade, but unlike the past, it no longer triggered guilt in me. Instead, I heard the truth more clearly than ever. Even in tears, my mother was only thinking about the house, about what they stood to lose, not once about the pain I had carried all these years. The next message was from Emily. Her voice was shrill, dripping with scorn. Who do you think you are? Just because you have some mediocre MBA, you think you're important? You're nothing special. That house, Mom and Dad kept it for me, not for you. And now you've canceled the mortgage, and we're about to lose it. Bravo, Amber. Are you happy now? I swear you'll regret this. I closed my eyes, listening to the sneer in her laugh at the end. That sound was so familiar I could picture her face, the mocking curl of her lips, the gleam in her eyes, so sure of her protection. But this time, instead of breaking me down, her words felt like confirmation that my choice had been right. The third message was from Dad. Unlike the others, he said almost nothing. Just heavy breathing for a long stretch, then finally one flat sentence. You've broken your mother. That was it. No question about how I was, no concern for me. Everything circled back to Mom, to her collapse. I shut off the phone and sat still, feeling something in my chest that was both hollow and burning all at once. I leaned my head back against the sofa, my thoughts tangled. One half of me was furious, wanting to scream that they had exploited me for years, wanting to shout that they were the ones who had destroyed me day by day. But the other half of me was cold, chillingly cold. I no longer felt shocked, no longer surprised. Everything they said, the blame, the mockery, the guilt, was nothing new. It was the same refrain I had lived through for years. It wasn't fresh pain. It was only the raw truth I had tried to ignore. In my family, love had never been two-sided. They had never loved me for who I was. They only loved me when I played the role of lifeline, of bank, of the one who carried all their burdens. As long as I could carry it, I was the good daughter. But the moment I dared to let go, I instantly became selfish, heartless, and cruel. That truth pierced me, painful but undeniable. I stood up and walked out onto the balcony. The cool morning wind swept through my hair, carrying away some of the heaviness. Looking out, the city was just waking, the streets still quiet, sunlight slowly spilling over the horizon. A part of me wanted to collapse, to apologize, just to smooth things over. But another part, the part growing stronger inside me, whispered that I had gone too far to ever turn back. I had taken the most important step, and if I retreated now, I would never escape again. I picked up my phone, staring at the long chain of missed calls. Mom, Dad, Emily, all three of them in a frenzy. But they weren't afraid of losing me. They were afraid of losing the house, of losing their financial safety net. And that was the clearest proof that in this family, love had never been born of real care. I pressed the power button, and the screen went black, plunging the room into silence. In that silence, I understood. I had begun a new life, one no longer bound by guilt, ridden calls, and accusatory voices. I told myself, if they call me ungrateful, then so be it. Because for the first time, I had chosen me. I sat quietly in my small apartment, my back resting against the worn sofa. Around me were four bare walls, clean, but cold. The morning light streamed through the window, sliding across the white surfaces where not a single photograph hung. My eyes wandered the room, and suddenly I recognized a truth I had long chosen to ignore. In this apartment, there was not a single family keepsake. No framed vacation photo, no cherished gift preserved on a shelf. Everything tied to family existed only in the form of bills, debts, and responsibilities I had shouldered alone. And here, this place, the only space truly mine, was utterly absent of their presence. A lump rose in my throat as childhood memories came rushing back. I remembered the day I graduated high school, one of those moments I had hoped would be a celebration. I stood on stage, diploma in hand, scanning the crowd for my parents' proud eyes. After the ceremony, Emily, only 16 at the time, was gifted a shiny red car to prepare her for the future. And me? I was handed a cheap notebook with the words, "Take care of yourself." My mother smiled as if it were meaningful, while my father nodded, saying, "The eldest daughter must be strong." I smiled. I thanked them, but inside, I shattered. Even as a teenager, it had already been decided that I would bear the weight, sacrifice, and stand alone with no one behind me. Meanwhile, Emily grew up swaddled in indulgence. She enrolled in college 3 times, dropped out 3 times, yet each time my parents praised her as brave for chasing her dreams. I remembered when she abandoned a pre-med program to switch to art, and my mother clapped her hands proudly, saying, "She has vision, she dares to live for passion." And me, the one who never quit, who worked endless shifts, who traded away her youth for study and work, was reduced to nothing more than "Amber knows how to handle things." That label sounded like praise, but in truth, it was only another way of shifting all the burdens onto me. I looked around my apartment, where every single item had been bought with my own careful savings: the small desk in the corner, the second-hand bookshelf I found at a clearance store, the old but sturdy sofa beneath me. Nothing bore the mark of family except the emptiness itself. And in that moment, I felt like a lone traveler who had spent years laboring not to build a home for herself, but to sustain an illusion of family that had only ever seen me as their ATM. I remembered all the times I had begged for just a little encouragement. The day I won a college scholarship, my mother only said, "Don't be too proud, you still have a lot to handle." The day I got my first job offer, my father remarked casually, "That's normal, everyone has to work." It was the complete opposite of how they celebrated Emily when one of her photos was published on a small art school website. Sitting in the dark, I realized that the love I had always craved had never truly existed. I wasn't a daughter to be cherished, I was simply their backup plan for every failure. Emily spent money recklessly on parties, new cameras, short vacations without ever having to worry. Each time her account ran dry, my mother would turn to me as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "Amber, your sister is still young, she needs opportunities, help her." And I did, I always did, until nothing was left of me but exhaustion. In my quiet apartment, I asked myself, why don't I even have a single family photo on the wall? Because in every group picture, I was always the shadow lingering at the edge, wearing a forced smile, eyes searching for recognition that never came. Hanging those photos would only make the room colder. So I left the walls empty. And that emptiness itself was proof that I had never truly had a real family. Thinking about it, my heart sank. I realized that from the time I was a child, I had been trained to be the lifeline. When my parents sank into debt, I was the one to gather money and pay. When Emily failed, I was the one to lift her back up with my time and finances. When my mother overspent, I was the one scrambling to cover the damage. I never had the chance to breathe for myself. I had lived as a tool, a resource, not as a person with dreams and feelings of my own. That truth was raw and merciless, but in the stillness of that morning, it was clearer than ever. My family had never really wanted me for who I was. They only wanted a walking ATM, something that worked, earned, and supplied whenever they needed. And the moment I stopped dispensing, I became the traitor. I took a deep breath, staring at the blank wall in front of me. For the first time in years, I saw myself clearly in it. A 26-year-old woman, scarred but strong, forged by the very wounds that had nearly broken her. I whispered to myself, if in their eyes I've only ever been an ATM, then it's time to pull the plug. A week had passed since the night I pressed that yellow note onto the door of the house in Canton. I had turned off my phone, cut all contact, and lived in a rare silence I hadn't known in years. At first, it felt hollow. I would wake in the middle of the night, startled, half expecting to hear the familiar ring of my phone demanding something from me. But slowly, that silence became a medicine. I would come home from work, unlock the door to my bare but spotless apartment, and for the first time, it felt like a real home, untouched, unclaimed, a place where no one could force me to sacrifice. But peace doesn't last forever. On Saturday morning, just as I was pouring myself a cup of coffee, a furious pounding rattled my door, loud enough to shake the frame. I froze for a moment, my heart tightening, because I already knew who it was. Slowly, I walked over and peeked through the crack. Out in the hallway stood my mother and Emily. My mother's face was gaunt, while Emily's was flushed with rage. I didn't open the door right away. I let them knock a little longer, until Emily's shrill voice erupted, sharp enough for the neighbors to hear. You canceled the mortgage, the whole family is about to lose the house. Are you insane? Are you trying to put Mom and Dad out on the street? I inhaled deeply, then opened the door, standing face to face with them. Emily's eyes burned with fury, and my mother tried to mask her trembling hands with a forced calm. I looked straight into my sister's eyes, my voice steady but cold as steel. You call it a house, but who's been paying for it these past 4 years? Not you. Now it's your turn. Emily froze for a moment, then let out a mocking laugh, her eyes glinting with contempt. You're always so calculating. You think money is everything. Family is about love, not bills. I tilted my head, my lips curling faintly. If family is about love, then why haven't I ever received any? All I've ever seen are bills shoved in front of me, again and again. My mother rushed to intervene, her voice breaking, pulling out the same tired refrain I had heard my whole life. Amber, this isn't how family behaves. You're tearing everything apart. No matter what, we're still a family. You can't just turn your back and walk away like this. As re-4. I stared at her for a long time, letting the flood of memories crash back, the nights I shouldered their debts, the moments I begged for comfort but was met with blame. I gripped the coffee cup in my hand, exhaled slowly, and my voice dropped low and firm. No, Mom, you're wrong. This is not what family love looks like. Love is not forcing one person to sacrifice until they collapse, while everyone else lives in comfort. Love is not calling your daughter selfish just because she dares to live for herself. If this is how family defines love, then I'd rather have no family at all. My mother's face drained of color, her lips trembling but unable to form a reply. Emily's face burned red, her feet stomping against the floor. You're a traitor. You've ruined everything just to get back at me. You'll regret this, Amber, you'll see. I didn't respond. I quietly closed the door in their faces, without a second's hesitation. Emily's pounding and curses echoed through the hallway, but this time, I didn't rush out, didn't beg them to stop, didn't try to explain. I simply turned away, set my coffee cup on the table, and let the noise rage outside like a storm beating against a wall of steel I had finally built inside myself. Eventually, the commotion faded. I thought they had left, but when I glanced out my apartment window down at the parking lot, I saw Emily still there, yelling into her phone, probably calling someone to play the victim. Her voice carried across the lot, dramatic and piercing, her arms flailing as though performing for the world. My mother sat slumped on a bench, her face buried in her hands. I stood there, watching the scene through the glass. In the past, the moment I saw them in pain, I would have rushed out, desperate to put out the fire, to be the peacemaker, the savior. But now, my feet didn't move. I stayed still, calm, finally recognizing that the responsibility to heal them had never been mine. I no longer owed it to anyone to throw myself into the flames for the very people who had tossed me into them time and time again. My heartbeat was slow, steady. There was no guilt, only a strange, profound calm. I drew the curtains shut, sat back down, and opened my laptop to work as if nothing had happened. Outside, Emily could scream until her voice gave out, and my mother could cry until she was empty, but here in this apartment, I had chosen silence. And for the first time, that silence was not surrender, it was strength. A few days after that heated confrontation with Emily and my mother in the apartment hallway, I thought everything had finally quieted down. I had grown used to the new silence on my phone, used to the absence of texts demanding transfers, used to the sudden freedom of not being dragged into problems that were never mine to solve. But that morning, as I returned from work and reached for my door, I saw my mother sitting silently outside. She wore an old coat, her eyes shadowed with exhaustion, her graying hair falling loosely around her face. In her hands was a crumpled envelope, an official notice from the bank. I slowed my steps, unlocked the door, but she quickly stood up, blocking my way. She held the envelope out, her voice hoarse and raw. "Amber, you can save this family. The bank has sent the final warning. If we don't make this month's payment, we'll lose the house." I looked at the paper in her hand, then at her face streaked with tears, lined with age. In the past, this sight would have been enough to break me, enough to open my wallet and forget every wound I had endured. But now, all I saw was a distance too wide to bridge. I stepped inside, letting her follow, and set my bag on the table. Then I turned back to her, meeting her eyes with a calm but cutting voice. "I've been saving this family for 10 years, Mom. I paid Dad's medical bills. I paid Emily's tuition. I paid off your credit card debt. I kept that house standing for 4 years, even though I never once had a place in it. I have no obligation left." She clenched the envelope tighter, her lips trembling. Taking a shaky step toward me, her voice cracked as she pleaded. "Emily isn't like you. She's fragile, she needs more chances. If we lose the house, she won't survive it. You have to understand she's your sister." I stifled a bitter laugh and shook my head. "No, Mom. She doesn't need another chance, she needs consequences. All these years, every time she failed, the whole family shielded her and shoved the burden onto me. That's exactly why she's never learned responsibility. She always knew someone else would rescue her. If it happens again this time, nothing will ever change." My mother staggered into a chair, burying her face in her hands. Her muffled sobs filled the quiet apartment. I stood there watching, but my heart no longer twisted the way it used to. Instead, I saw the truth laid bare. My mother, who had always imposed her will so forcefully, was finally spent. She had no arguments left, no accusations left to hurl at me. In that moment, for the first time, I saw her admit her own helplessness, not with words, but with tears. She wept, no longer demanding my help, no longer weaponizing love to bind me. She wept like a woman drained of all strength, watching her family crumble without the power to stop it. I sat down across from her, my voice low, stripped of anger, carrying only exhaustion. "Mom, I've given everything. I've sacrificed my youth, my peace, my dreams to hold together a home that I was never truly allowed to be part of. But love can't be built on exploitation. A family can't survive on the shoulders of just one person. If we lose the house today, then that's the price for years of piling every responsibility onto one back." She didn't reply, she just kept her face in her hands, sobbing, her shoulders trembling with each breath. I sat still, watching her, and felt a strange calmness spreading through me. I no longer wished for her to understand, no longer hoped she would change. But at least, in that moment, she didn't deny my words. She didn't accuse, didn't mock, didn't deflect. That silence was its own kind of acknowledgement that everything I had said was true. Time moved slowly in that small room. When her sobs finally quieted, she stood, wiping at her face, clutching the envelope tight. She looked at me with weary eyes, gave a small nod, and turned toward the door. I remained seated, watching as it closed behind her. Inside me, there was no hatred, no triumph. Only a strange serenity, as though at last, I had been released from the role they had chained me to all these years. I was not the family's savior. I was no one's lifeline. I was simply Amber, a human being, with the right to live for myself. In that moment, I knew it was over. There was nothing left to return to, no reason left to keep carrying the weight. My mother had broken down, had revealed her helplessness. And I, for the first time in 10 years, no longer felt guilty. 30 days later, what I had long anticipated finally happened. The bank officially foreclosed on the house in Canton. One morning, as I opened my work email, a local news alert caught my eye. Property foreclosed in Canton Township. The address appeared on the screen so familiar it made me pause. The house I had paid for, month after month, for 4 years, the house where I never truly had a place, no longer belonged to them. Everything they had clung to with my money collapsed in a single, cold notice from the bank. Emily was the first to face the consequences. With no studio to take photos, no place to stage her live streams, she was forced to move into our aunt's house in Dearborn. From what I heard through acquaintances, she complained endlessly, blaming me for destroying the family's future. But this time, no one cared to listen. Even my aunt, the one who had always spoiled Emily, gave her nothing more than a cramped spare room and insisted she deal with her mounting credit card debt on her own. My father, always the quiet one, chose to leave the house before the bank even arrived. He moved into a cheap rental apartment near the industrial district, living like a shadow in silence. My mother, after years of binding her identity to that house, was finally forced to let it go. She moved in with an old friend in Livonia, and since then, I haven't heard a word about her. My family, the facade that once seemed unshakable, the so-called home, I sacrificed nearly all my youth to preserve, disintegrated in the span of a single month. As for me, I chose a different path. When the official foreclosure notice reached me as a co-account holder, I felt no guilt. Instead, I felt free. I packed up the few belongings in my Ann Arbor apartment and moved to Chicago, the city I had always dreamed of living in but never dared to, held back by the family's endless demands. I rented a small apartment overlooking a bustling street, opened a savings account in my own name, and for the first time in my life, my monthly paycheck no longer drained into endless bills for others. It stayed with me. I began to give time back to myself. In the mornings, I walked through the park near my apartment, practicing yoga under the pale golden sunlight, letting my body rediscover a steady, peaceful rhythm. In the afternoons, I sat in a small cafe on the corner, reading books, jotting down notes just for me. On weekends, I treated myself to small trips. Strolling along the shores of Lake Michigan, visiting art museums, or sometimes simply sitting by the window, watching the rain fall, allowing my mind to rest. There were no more phone calls demanding, no more voices asking me to cover a bill, no more accusing stares when I failed to please them. There was only me, and for the first time, that was enough. One day, I stood by the lake as the wind whipped hard, sending my hair flying in the salty air. I closed my eyes and drew a deep breath. The cold gusts brushed against my face, carrying away the weight of all those years. I saw my reflection in the water, not hollow, not strained. Just lighter, with a faint smile that, at last, came from within. I understood then that I had stepped through a door, leaving behind the endless cycle of sacrifice and neglect to finally live a life of my own. Chicago was vast and bustling, yet I never felt lonely. On the contrary, I felt freedom in every step. I no longer needed to prove my worth to anyone. I was no longer bound by false promises or manipulative tears. I began to write new plans for the future, a future that, for the first time, I would decide. The house in Canton might be gone, my family might have fallen apart, but I had no regrets. Because the truth was, that house had never been my home. That family had never loved me with unconditional love. It was all just a facade, and when it finally crumbled, I was able to see my own worth clearly. As I walked away from the lake that afternoon, the golden sun stretched across the water, and the wind rippled gentle waves along the surface. I moved forward with a heart lighter than it had ever been. For the first time in years, I was no longer afraid of tomorrow. I knew that at last, I was truly living for myself. Sitting in my new apartment in Chicago, I looked out the window as the sunset draped its colors across the tall buildings. For the first time in years, I felt peace. No more relentless phone calls, no more accusations, no more endless bills piled on my shoulders. Just me, my own breath, and a life beginning anew. I spoke to myself, and to anyone listening to this story. Cutting out the toxic is not selfish, it's saving yourself. I once believed I was ungrateful if I didn't pay my family's debts, once thought I was a bad person if I refused their demands. But the truth is, sacrifice does not equal love, and real love never requires someone to exhaust themselves just to please others. I lost my youth trying to be the lifeline, the backup bank, only to discover that when I collapsed, no one reached out a hand. That wasn't love, that was exploitation disguised as family. Today, I stand up and declare, I am no one's bank anymore. I am myself. I choose to keep my strength and my future for me. I choose to build a life on freedom, not on chains. To them, I may be a traitor, heartless, ungrateful. But in my heart, I know this. For the first time, I have been loyal to myself. If you've ever been dismissed by your family, ever reduced to a tool to carry their weight, remember this, you are not wrong for protecting yourself. You are not selfish for saying no to unreasonable demands. And you have every right to choose a different path, a path where love only exists when it comes with respect. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you again in the next story, right here, at this hour every day.